and welcome back to another episode of The Book Stop. I'm your host Jen, and I'm very excited to talk about today's episode. But before we begin, there will be spoilers as we talk about major events that unfold within the story. In addition, each episode will have a list of trigger warnings in the description. Be sure to follow the podcast on Instagram at The Book Stop Podcast, and show your support on Patreon for early access to episodes and other additional content. And we're back with another episode of The Book Stop. Today we are joined with none other than the one and only in the whole wide world. There's not a single other person named Kim.
I love it. That was great.
Joined from many miles away. But to you, we're just both in your ear, so...
We're both in your ear. How lucky are you?
Wow.
You get both of us in both of your ears.
But yeah, let's hop into it. What book did you bring for us to talk about, and why'd you bring it?
So I brought this really underground, little known book. It's called, if you will, The Ballad of Songbirds and Snakes by an author, little known author, Suzanne Collins. You've probably never heard of her before. She didn't do anything important other than I think there was some kind of a series that, never really took off. It was called The Hunger Games. And so this book is the prequel to that series.
Yeah, absolutely. The Ballad of Songbirds and Snakes by Suzanne Collins. So this book came out in May 2020. So right at the beginning of COVID. And so I feel like a lot of people either clung to this book a lot, and then that snowballed into getting back into the Hunger Games again, because this again is a prequel to the Hunger Games, where we follow a certain character that a lot of people don't totally love. But before we hop into some major details, we're going to play a little game.
I am ready.
You are going to summarize this book in 30 seconds.
Okay.
All right, so whenever you're ready, try your best, and may the odds be ever in your favor.
That was perfect. All right. The Ballad of Songbirds and Snakes is a prequel to the Hunger Games trilogy. This book follows Coriolanus Snow. He's a lower middle class, narcissistic son of a bitch. He starts off the book being like, oh, woe is me, woe is me. He gets chosen to be a mentor at his school for one of the Hunger Games tributes. The Hunger Games is in its early stages. Try and use this as an opportunity to get riches and popularity. Mwahaha, rubbing his fingers together. He's like, mwahaha, I'm going to get power and riches. And along the way, he kind of falls in love with the District 12 tribute. It fucks everything up. He goes into the military/police force. More bad shit happens, and so it's like, haha, just kidding, I'm a terrible guy. End of story.
Yay! We love it. Great job. I'm going to summarize it really quick for anybody who hasn't heard of the story. It is kind of a newer story, so just kind of give you a quick rundown. In the capital, 18-year-old Coriolanus?
That's how I've been reading it in my head.
We're going to call him Snow, though, for the rest of the pod, just because that's a mouthful. But Coriolanus Snow is preparing for his one shot of glory as a mentor in the games. The once mighty House of Snow has fallen on hard times, its fate hanging on the small chance that Coriolanus will be able to outrun, outwit, and outmaneuver
hang on. No, I gotta pause you for a second. You did not just parody the Survivor tagline for the Hunger Games.
I don't know the Survivor tagline, but
it is outwit, outlast, outplay.
Oh.
So it sounds almost exactly what you just said. And I love it because it fits.
Oh my goodness. Yeah, no, I did not know that. Outrun, outwit, and outmaneuver his fellow peers to mentor the winning tribute. The odds are against him. He's been given the humiliating assignment of mentoring the female tribute from District 12, the lowest of the low. Their fates are now completely intertwined. Every choice Coriolanus makes could lead to favor or failure, triumph or ruin. Inside the arena, it will be a fight to the death. Outside of the arena, Coriolanus starts to feel for his doomed tribute and must weigh his needs to follow the rules against his desire to survive no matter what it takes.
That was so much better than mine. Yes.
I mean, to be fair, I had more than 30 seconds, and I had the help of Google to help me kind of summarize that.
That's true, and I am not good at improv.
Yeah, so before we get into it, I'm just going to give a warning. We're going to be jumping around a lot because there's so much I have to say about this book. So I want to get as much through as we can, but there's just so much I want to talk about. The first thing I want to jump into is, right off the bat, what is your favorite quote from this book?
Favorite quote? That's wild. I had no idea you were going to ask me to pull my favorite quote. So this is just off the top of my head.
Oh, okay.
The quote where it's, "The show's not over until the mockingjay sings."
Mm-hmm.
I think that would be my favorite. And I know it's sort of obvious, it's a bit heavy-handed. And we can also talk later about how I think the mockingjay motif is a bit heavy-handed itself in this book.
Mm-hmm.
However, I think it fits really nicely. It's a great tool to help like relate to real world. The phrase, "the show's not over until the fat lady sings," or whatever that quote is, right?
Mm-hmm.
It's very similar. And it's so, "The show's not over until the mockingjay sings" is the quote from this book. So it helps sort of tie it into our world in a way that like helps us understand that world. But anyways, I will say that's my favorite quote. And also it has so many meanings within this book itself, of course, and then also within the greater world of the Hunger Games.
Yeah. Absolutely. I agree. It kind of draws in that realism, like, oh, yeah, there are a lot of things that are connecting to our world, and that is kind of shifted a little bit to fit theirs in a more of a need. Plays into, like, as generations go on, things change to fit more of their needs. So it makes sense.
Mm-hmm. Especially with the fact that when this quote is introduced, our main character, Snow, his sort of reaction to it is to be like, "I don't even know what that means." And it's funny because it adds another layer of us as the reader not quite being able to relate to Snow in a way that I think is effective to the book at large. I think it's good that we're not able to fully relate to Snow. So it adds another layer to that. And then, I don't know, again, I do want to talk a little bit about the heavy-handed stuff, but I think we'll get into that more because I have a bad feeling that that's one of your critiques about this book, but we'll get into that later.
I'm really excited for this episode because we're going to have different views and perspective on this book. But there are stuff that I do like about this book, and I do have my favorite quote here. When I was reading it, I was like, wow, okay, this kind of, like, not pull me out of the book, but kind of waking me up and like, oh, okay, this is what's going on. I need to, like, refocus. So Dr. Gull, Sir Janus, and Snow, we'll call him, is kind of all talking about the rights of the Hunger Games and how they're treating these tributes. And that's what Dr. Gull says. She says, "That's our right." And Sir Janus says, "No, it isn't. I don't care what you say. You have no right to starve people, to punish them for no reason. No right to take away their life and their freedom. Those are things everyone is born with, and they're not yours for the taking. Winning a war doesn't give you that right. Having more weapons doesn't give you that right. Being from the capital doesn't give you that right. Nothing does." Oh, that quote, like, it hit me so hard.
Yeah, no, absolutely. I think that really sort of hits the nail over the head, and sort of that is like a big aspect of the messaging in this book. And again, the Hunger Games trilogy as well. That's a good one. It pretty much says everything that we're sort of trying to say almost while we're reading this book. I mean, I don't know about you, but I had so many times when I was reading this book where I just wish that I could like tell Snow off and be like, you gotta stop being such a dick kind of thing. And so that sentence really sort of sums up a lot of what I think readers should want to say in that moment.
Yeah. Because a lot of the characters didn't really agree with what was happening. They kind of just followed along, like, you know, little soldiers. And Sir Janus, he stood up for what was right. And it was nice having that one character that felt like they actually had a voice and actually did something.
And you know, while we're on this topic, something super interesting that I didn't really realize until we were talking about it. Did you know that both Coriolanus Snow and Sejanus have the word anus in their first name?
I do know that. I did notice that, yeah.
That's great. I did not notice that until just now. And I've now read this book twice.
That's a great detail that you figured out on my podcast. And I love that we have this now solidified in history, and it will forever and always be here.
It will. And you know, it means so much. It's so important to the story.
Yeah. But yeah, let's hop into it. So what are some things that you liked about this story?
Everything. So again, Jen and I already know that we have different opinions on this because we kind of like sneak previewed it for each other. I really enjoyed this book. And I will say, though, the first time I read it, it needed a bit of simmering for it to really get into me. But now the second time reading it, it really sort of solidified how much I love this book. And again, the Hunger Games series at large. So I really like this book overall. And I think one of my absolute favorite things that is crucial to the messaging of this book is that it establishes that the police and the military are one and the same, in the sense that our knowledge of the world of Panem is that peacekeepers are basically sort of the police.
Mm-hmm.
And yes, in the Hunger Games series, we do also see that they act as the military, but it's not, they don't get into it so much, right? It's just kind of there. We don't really overtly talk about it. There's a lot more going on.
Mm-hmm.
However, in this book, basically for about half the book, give or take, he is in the military police of being a peacekeeper. And it's very well thought out, the fact that, again, Suzanne Collins is establishing that the police and the military in this world are one and the same. Because, sorry folks, in reality, the police and the military are one and the same in a bad way.
Yeah.
In a bad way. So yeah, that's just kind of one of the things that I loved, is that was a very, very openly discussed thing in this book. It was pretty obvious. And it was also, I think, that and sort of how it applies to the sense that, again, Snow is at this point sort of a lower middle class, give or take, or maybe even just middle class, but whatever. He's not like lower class and he's not upper class.
He's a lower class trying to be a higher class.
Yeah, like a lower class with a lot of the privileges that allows him to climb the ladder a lot higher and jump the ladder kind of thing. And so that's another thing, is like, so I love how Suzanne Collins made it clear that the police and the military are one and the same, and specifically how it ties into sort of the pipeline of like taking lower and middle class people and funneling them into sort of the military as much as possible. And like, it's a huge problem in specifically the United States right now, is that we have such this gap between classes that is already widening and terrible in so many ways, but then especially because it forces so many lower and lower middle class people into the military, because it's sort of the only way to get a college education and move forward in life. And that is a huge part of this book, and that is something I think we're just now starting to talk more about in real life. But that's a huge part of this book, right? Because Snow is, we talked about, he's kind of somewhere in the middle class, and he doesn't have really the money or the ability to go to college. Part of the whole plot of this book is that he's helping Lucy Gray so that hopefully she wins, so that he wins and can go to college. And of course, when that sort of pans out differently, he has to take the path of the military to be able to make some kind of life for himself in some way. And that's a very big thing that, again, I don't think is getting talked about enough in US society today. And I think this book is a really great way of being like, hey guys, let's fucking talk about it.
Yeah. Now that you're mentioning it, I definitely can see it a lot more. I think I was just too focused on trying to understand what's happening in this book to really pay attention to that. But now that I'm like rethinking it, and like as you're talking about it, I totally see exactly what you're talking about.
Thank you. And it's hard. And long story short, when this book came out, I had pretty recently gone through a breakup with the guy in the military. That was a whole thing. And I'm a self-proclaimed pacifist. So that was like ended in a weird breakup. Not a good time, whatever. And then this book came out, and I'm a huge Hunger Games fan. So I read it. And so I also, because of all that, because I was kind of on the heels of all that, I sort of related to it a bit more. Not in the sense that like I was in the shoes of Snow or whatever, but just I could kind of understand, partially sympathize with some of the aspects of this book in a way that I think helped me understand it more and helped me like it more, because I was like, oh, I'm glad that it's really bringing a lot of this stuff to light. So maybe it was like it also came to my life at the perfect time for me to be like, oh yeah, shit's fucked up. But yeah, I don't know. Again, just going back to it, really love this book. I do think that being like the central messaging of this book, to sort of start talking about that and really bring up how that is massively problematic in our society, is important. Yeah. I have like kind of a big jump here for a second.
Okay.
I was like, I wanted to ask you a question about something. I wanted to ask you, do you think if Coriolanus Snow had grown up in the districts that he would have ended up differently?
That's a very interesting question. So I think it has to go down with nurture and nature. There are some things that people are just born to be, and that's just the nature of their being. That's just who they are. Whether that just be their soul or their mindset, whatever it is. And then there's, what your upbringing is and how you were raised. That also kind of follows into the way that you become a person. That is an extremely hard question to answer. Because I want to say Yeah, I think he would have ended up the same if he ended up in the districts, but ended up exactly where he was, being the president of Panem. Also, it's kind of hard because we get to see Coriolanus as a teenager, a young adult, and he has attributions that are completely different than what we know of him in Catching Fire. In Mockingjay, we see him almost as a person instead of an antagonist. And no matter where he is born and raised, I think it could change how he is as a person. But then it also has to play into, like, once he moves into the capital, that was the route we're following, that he becomes the president.
Right.
Even if he was born a certain way, his mindset is going to change because of the influence around him. So I think maybe if, let's say he grew up in 12, he is this innocent kid and he grew up like people in 12 did. Once he moves to the capital and becomes a figure of political standing, it's going to change who you are. And maybe it's not necessarily always your own mindset that's being changed. It could be other influences of other people. But you're kind of seeing the world from a different perspective. And sometimes you have to make hard choices because of that. It's really hard to say if he would be a different person. I couldn't tell you.
No, honestly though, that's an excellent answer, because you're right. There's so many factors at play. Even if the personality sort of stays overall similar, it's like he wouldn't necessarily have the same opportunities to fucking kill people and that kind of stuff and get away with it.
Yeah, it's kind of like Katniss. We know her as being this quote-unquote sweet girl from District 12, and then by the end of the story, she's making all of these big judgments, and she has all these people that are kind of crafting her into this person of political view. And that Katniss that we saw in the last book isn't the Katniss that we knew from District 12. Because of the events that happened to her over the series, it changed her as a person.
Right, yeah.
If it was the same way, if she came from 12 and became the president, I think her standing and her perspective on things would change as well. So it's tough to say.
When I was thinking about this question and when I was thinking about asking you, I sort of came up with the thought process that I think if Snow would have been raised in, say, District 12, I think that he would have ended up somewhere like Gale. And that's the thing, is also like thinking back on Gale for a second. Yeah. I remember when I read the trilogy books and I was like, kind of team Gale in the beginning, because I was like, oh, he hates the capital, he wants to like run away, cool, good for him, he's brave in that sense of being like, fuck the police, I'm out of here kind of thing.
You see a little bit of that in Snow with him wanting to run away with Lucy Gray. So I totally get what you're saying. Like, if he were to live there, he would end up like Gale,
right? Yeah. And it's like, the more that I thought about it, the more that I'm like, wow, there are striking similarities. But yeah, so I kind of just wanted to point out that I think it's interesting, and also tie this into the fact that when we start this book, there's already a lot of similarities between Snow and Katniss, honestly. Like, they have a lot of similarities, and while this book does make it clear that they have very different personalities in the way that they react to things, it still establishes clearly that they both start out as quote-unquote poor, and different standards of poor by far, but nonetheless, they both start growing up sort of struggling and in difficulty with finding food, difficulty with sort of having a place in society, difficulty with whatever it is. But when the first time I read this, I thought that was interesting. I was like, oh, we're starting him off as if like he's poor me, poor evil President Snow kind of thing. But also another point to the book in the fact that it did make those similarity between Katniss and Snow. Again, I will reiterate, I think it was also great that you could tell from the first few chapters of this book that she was still trying to present Snow as not being a great person. She was still trying to present at every turn that like his thoughts are constantly as, how does he get more power? How does he get more control? How can he use this person?
Selfish.
Right.
That's gonna be something I want to talk about later when we get to it. But yeah, so some things that I really liked in this story, I really enjoyed the classroom scenes that we have with Snow and all of his fellow peers. They were very information packed and very attentive. I think that it wasn't too like shoving it down your throat because they were spaced out so well. So I really enjoyed the classroom scenes. I also really, really enjoyed seeing the beginning of things and seeing how things grew and formed, the reason why we have the Hunger Games period. We get to see a lot and understand a lot of the reasons why this world has shifted the way it is, which I really enjoyed. Like, when I read any kind of books my go-to is always characters, and then it's always history. Like, I want to know why these characters are being dealt this hand, I guess. So that was really cool, as well as the origin stories of the sponsorship.
Yeah.
So mentors, I guess you could say.
Mm-hmm.
So I just really enjoyed how that kind of came into play and how important it was in this, being the first year that they really had sponsorships. It's sad how it came to be, but it helped down the year and eventually helped Katniss. So I really enjoyed how that was all kind of laid out.
Mm-hmm. Speaking of sort of the evolution of the mentorship side of things, did you catch how there was a moment where I think it was Snow who was talking about it? Somebody was talking about like, oh, it's almost as if being a mentor is kind of like a punishment for even us, even like the capital citizens. Like there was a moment where they like kind of talked about it, and I thought that was really good because obviously it's framed as if like, oh, it's this opportunity for you to like abuse the tributes and make something out of it. But then in reality, it is also still like at large the capital tool to be using also its own citizens at that point in order to help the tributes, because it's just training and emphasizing this power hierarchy and this you're gonna help them, but you know that you're not helping them, you know that they're sort of just animals to you, whatever. And so it's like training the kids to think that way and to grow up thinking that way already, so that future capital will still run in that same way as like capital is great, districts are bad kind of thing.
Yeah, the segregation of all of it, it's just,
yeah,
we'll get into it in a second.
What more did you like about the book?
Oh, that was it. So let's hop over to our dislikes.
Was that really it? Oh my god. Jen.
I mean, there are like other things that I liked about it without getting into detail, but those were the things that stuck out to me that I liked the most.
Okay.
What are some things that you didn't like about this book?
Some things that I genuinely didn't like about this book, like I sort of mentioned before, I do think the Mockingjay image, the Mockingjay symbolism gets a bit heavy-handed in this book. I go back and forth. I did dislike it. However, I understand that this book is meant as a young adult fiction, and young adult fiction a lot of times has to sort of hit things over the head a little bit in order to really get the messaging across. And I think that that's great. I think also this story, at its core, it's a very adult story. It really is. But I love that Suzanne Collins' Hunger Games world, Panem, all that is told through the lens of a young adult story, because I believe like that's where it needs to be, if that makes sense. Like this story needs to be in young adult fiction because it is more palatable in a way that will get to a larger audience, as it clearly has.
Right.
And ideally affect the most change and the most conversation. I do think that the Mockingjay imagery is something that maybe for my sort of adult taste is a bit too heavy-handed. So I technically dislike that, but I also technically understand where it's coming from.
Yeah. I think one dislike that we kind of mutually agreed on before was that there was just too many characters with crazy names.
Yes.
Just didn't feel anything towards. Now listen, we have 12 tributes and 12 mentors, right? I think the issues with all the mentors, which was important for us. What I think should have happened was, instead of naming all of the tributes, they should have just named the mentors, because that was what was important to Snow. When we were in the Hunger Games, knowing the tributes was important to Katniss. That's why we never learned the mentors' names, because it wasn't important to her. So I feel like if we flipped it and only knew the mentor's name and didn't know the tribute's name, except for like, you know, the important ones Lucy Gray interacts with, then I feel like it wouldn't be so overwhelming. But oh my god, the names.
Yeah.
Oh my god, I couldn't do it. I could not do it. It made me literally, one, not care for any of them, because I'm like, I don't even know who you are. And then two, when somebody got injured or hurt or died, I literally had no idea who it was.
Yeah.
I was like, who are you?
Right.
I don't know. Too many characters, just too many.
I'll agree with you there, for sure.
I also thought that it was a bit slow in a few places. Okay, a lot of places. It was just too much unnecessary information that kind of got thrown around to kind of distract the reader, I felt like, as well as a lot of repetitive information. I've said in a podcast before, is like, when an author repeats something and is like repetitive, it's important and they're trying to draw attention to it. But in this one, I just didn't feel that. I just felt like there was a word count, honestly.
Right.
And she was just trying to get to it. That's just my own personal feel towards the story. The story is pretty beefy. It's a pretty big book compared to like Hunger Games. I felt like having that much information in there not being necessary, it made the pacing really slow. We didn't get into the Hunger Games, like the actual games, until page like 150-ish, and we were out of the Hunger Games in less than 100 pages. The Hunger Games was not important to the story, which is fine, because we're here to learn other things besides just the games. But I don't know, it drew a lot of suspense away from me as well. I did not feel how I felt in the Hunger Games. I don't want to be mean, but I found it a bit boring, the way that the story was being told. Again, just so much going on, the pacing being so slow. But I don't mean to hurt your feelings, but I don't think I've ever wanted to DNF a book.
No, really?
So
Oh.
yeah. I was like, I'm doing this for Kim. I'm doing this for you. Okay.
Well, I'm glad. I do appreciate it.
By part 3, I was just like, there's more.
Yeah.
There's a whole nother part. Not saying that this book is all around bad. There are good parts in it. There's very important messages. There is a story to be told. It just wasn't a story I was 100% into.
You know what I think is something that could have solved that issue and a lot of other issues with this book? If the book was a little bit more split between quote-unquote Snow's perspective and quote-unquote Sejanus's perspective.
Okay. Oh, okay.
I think that would have helped move it along a bit more and given it a little bit more of a flair to help follow along. Because I don't agree with you that it was boring, but I can see where you're coming from. And I think that there are definitely parts in this story that are for sure slower and more of a slower burn. And I think part of the reason also why that is so is because we are, for better or for worse, we're comparing it to the Hunger Games trilogy. And the Hunger Games trilogy had kind of a way of doing it. The first one was so largely centered around the games. The second one was about half and half between the rebellion and the games, and then so on and so forth. But the games were a huge part of that series, of course, because it's literally called The Hunger Games. And while there's still an important part of this one as well, the book is titled The Ballad of Songbirds and Snakes, right? It's not called The Hunger Games, the prequel. So it is already kind of trying to tell you off the bat, like, hey, we're not necessarily going to have as much Hunger Games as you want. And I do think on its own, that's totally fine. But I do also see where you're coming from. We are used to it being a heavier part of the book, and we want it to be a heavier part of the book because of that. I also think, you know, again, having it split between sort of Snow's perspective and Sejanus's perspective would have been interesting. Or even Snow and Lucy, or even Snow, Lucy, Sejanus, kind of getting maybe more of it.
Yeah.
But you know, that does bring us overall to just talking about, like, it's so interesting to read a book where your main character, your protagonist, is the bad guy. Even if he's not technically the bad guy yet, he becomes the bad guy.
See, that's the thing with making a prequel. The stakes are a little, like, they're lower. Like, you already know the outcome of things. So not a lot of things are surprises because you know how things are gonna, like, pan out. And with this being, I think it's like 64, 65 years before the events of the Hunger Games, like Katniss' story, a lot of people were just searching for connections between the two. Personally, just did not feel connected with Snow. And I think that was the issue, like you said. Being the bad guy, you know what's going to happen with him. I just didn't care. I'm sorry, I just didn't care. There were good things, but I think having those different points of view would be very interesting. Like, that was one of my missed opportunities, is having points of view for a story. I'm a sucker for points of view. I say it in, like, every podcast. I'm like,
yeah,
give me some points of views. But a change of perspective would really open it up a little bit more and give you somebody else to root for. Because, yeah, I rooted for Lucy Gray for a little bit, but I couldn't connect with her enough because it was just always, like, through the mind of Snow, it was always selfish thinking. So I just never connected.
And he has a very shallow understanding of Lucy.
Yes.
Even at the times where you kind of think, oh, maybe he does love her. Oh, I think this is the moment that I'm going to think that he actually loves her, which is, I don't know. I still think that's kind of bullshit, actually.
Oh, we're going to talk about it. Don't worry.
Wait, can we talk about it now?
Sure.
Because this is one of my questions that I had written down.
Okay.
And I don't even know how to answer it, but I wanted to ask you, do you think Lucy Gray loved Snow? And do you think Snow loved Lucy Gray?
Okay, I want to first mention that the romance was not a major part of the story. It wasn't the hindering branch like it is for, like, Peeta and Katniss to literally have to love each other to get out of the arena alive.
Mm-hmm.
And even though it was kind of a forced love, it was still there and eventually branched out. This story, I felt like it wasn't necessarily about having that love connection between them. So I personally did not feel literally a single spark of anything between Lucy and
Good.
Snow.
Okay.
I didn't see a hint of any kind of thought that floated through his head that's like, oh, you know, Lucy Gray just looks so good sitting in that zoo right now. Like, she's like nothing. I felt
Right.
absolutely nothing. It felt so rushed and so forced at the end. I personally do not ship them. I don't know.
Yeah, no, I don't ship them either.
No. I feel like Lucy Gray just popped in and out of the story so much that, again, I just never connected with her. So
Mm-hmm.
I personally didn't really see anything. I think that she could have. I think she could have fallen in love with Snow, given the chance. I think the way that the circumstances went, I don't think she genuinely felt anything towards him. You know what I hated? Oh my god, I'm sorry. You know what I hated?
What?
Oh my god, when she sang that song about her ex-lover, and he got jealous.
I was like, you selfish idiot.
This point, they had barely talked, and there was no connection between them.
Right?
Yet.
And he was like, that's my girl.
Yeah, I was like, shut up. You know what? I know what the real reason why I didn't like this book is because it was from a man's perspective.
Yeah, I was literally gonna say that. I was like, oh my god, if this is actually how like some men think, like, bro, you gotta get therapy.
Yeah. What else did you want to add?
Completely agree. I want to add on that note of like, oh, do they love each other? Do either one of them love the other? Whatever. I agree that it's not like central to the story, but I do think that there's a very clear parallel between needing that quote unquote relationship as like an allyship. Because the way that I read this, and I don't know, maybe I need to read it a third time, but the way that I read this was I think that Lucy Gray was really kind of leading him on in order to help herself live.
Oh, yeah.
Which, like, good. That's what you have to do. I respect the fuck out of that. You're being put in this terrible circumstances. Do what you got to do. And so then in the end, when she kind of like does seem to have a little bit of something for him, I'm sort of confused on that. I'm sort of like, I can't tell if she does or doesn't have feelings for him, or is still kind of trying to use him to be able to like make a living, whatever. I can't really tell. I think Snow's perspective of it all is very clear. I don't think he ever actually loves her. I think he's only ever in love with the idea of having her as like a trophy.
Yeah, absolutely.
But it does also bring me back to kind of that parallel between Snow and Gale. I think Gale definitely had feelings for Katniss, genuine feelings for Katniss, but I also think it did end up turning into a bit of his jealousy was fueled by wanting her as a little bit of a trophy as well.
Yeah.
Not nearly to the extent that Snow was with Lucy, enough where it was like, come on, dude.
I was never Team Gale. I was always Team Peeta because he was played by Josh Hutcherson. So, obviously.
Your husband, yes.
Yes, of course. So, I will always choose him, no matter what. But anyways, I think with Gale, the reason I didn't like him was that it was kind of a small town vibe where Katniss was kind of the only option. Got connected to her because there was no one else in District 12 he would really see himself end up with. And then, you know, the events of Hunger Games happen and the connection between Peeta and Katniss just grows. And he got jealous, like you said. And he's like, you know, Katniss was the strong girl in District 12, and I wanted to call her my wife, and now he can't. So we've been talking about the Hunger Games a lot, obviously. It's kind of hard not to talk about the Hunger Games because, again, like you said, this is its own single book. It's a prequel. It's not the Hunger Games. But there are a few things I want to talk about that we learn in this book that kind of correlates and connects with the other books. One being, like, the one thing that really stuck out to me was the Coming to the Tree song.
Yeah, the hanging tree.
The Hanging Tree, yeah. Which was written by Lucy Gray about Snow, which I found was very interesting. And then to turn it around and use it against Snow and the other ones, I found that very interesting and I really liked it. The next thing I want to talk about is the treatments of the tributes and how different they are. We know in Hunger Games, the tributes are like treated like royalty. They're giving, you know, feast upon feast, and they live in these luxury hotels, and they're trained to give on a show, literally is what they do, and they're trained to do that. In this book, we are greeted with the tributes being thrown in an actual zoo. Some of them were injured when they were thrown in there. Half of them didn't even survive to the games. They died along the way just from dehydration, no food, all this kind of stuff.
Mm-hmm.
And treating the tributes with respect of any kind or helping them in any kind, you got like looked down upon. Weren't trained in any way. They were just kind of thrown into the arena, which in Hunger Games is this entire arena that built to give on the best show ever. There's so much technology. In this book, it's like a football field, like literally a stadium that they're just, if there's debris everywhere, they're just thrown in there. It was very interesting to read about that, and that's another thing I really liked about it, was seeing the progression of the story as it goes over through the 60 plus years into the events of Hunger Games.
Yeah, I totally agree. I also think it was interesting that there's a lot of legacy characters. Lucky Flickerman is trying to host-ish these first few games. And obviously when we see the games in the original trilogy, Caesar Flickerman has taken over and he is the host of hosts. So that's like kind of a legacy, right? It's like the Flickerman legacy. We had Lucky and now we have Caesar.
Yeah.
When I first read this book, I was like, oh, well, you just wanted to take the same kind of character. But then I thought about it more and I was like, no, actually that makes a lot of sense in such a close-knit money talks community. It would be a legacy like that.
Yeah.
You would have Ryan Seacrest and then like Ryan Seacrest Jr. take over. It would be like that.
Yeah, absolutely.
Snow obviously is already kind of a bit of a legacy. And we learn later that literally his dad came up with the fucking Hunger Games. Well, stole the idea for the Hunger Games. But even that means that Snow is a legacy of the Hunger Games.
And like they each kind of had their own toe in it, where his dad was kind of doing it for a bad thing, and the sponsorship and helping the tributes in the games was Snow's idea, and it was to help them.
Right.
So they both had a toe in it, whether it be on polar opposite ends of the spectrum. They both had a hand in forming the games.
Both of them suck.
Yeah. So who would you say in this story is your favorite character?
My favorite character. My favorite little privileged pacifist. I love Sejanus. Sejanus Plinth. Because I relate to him a lot. Privileged to live in the United States. I'm privileged to live in California. You know, a lot of things are good in life. A lot of things are good. I come from a position of privilege. But I also identify as a pacifist, and as much as possible, I try to take genuinely nonviolent actions towards doing good stuff as much as possible. And obviously I need to work on that a lot and get better and better, whatever. I relate to him in that sense of very, very strongly feeling one way about something and kind of trying to make a difference. But at the same time, it's also like with Marcus's reaction, right? Marcus's reaction to Sejanus is he's kind of like, fuck you. You can say like, oh, I feel bad for you guys, whatever. But you're saying that from this position of privilege. Your life is not the one on the line right now,
right,
kind of thing. So again, you know, he's my favorite character, though. I love Sejanus. I think that he's great. I think that it's especially great that his character is the son of like a munitions dealer. Of everything that says, obviously. Yeah, I don't know, he was cool, and it sucked that he died.
Yeah, we see him throughout the entire story too, just as much as Snow, which again I think should pull into him having his own point of view. And I think it would be very interesting to see like the other side of the spectrum of how he thought about the games.
Another thing that I like kind of loved about him, but was also like sad, was that he had sort of a very poor judge of character.
Yeah.
The whole time he thought that like Snow was his friend. I mean, what can we say, right? Snow is a very charming narcissist, so of course a lot of people sort of thought that he was the good guy, whatever. But because we were from the point of view of inside of him, we know that he's not. But obviously like the whole time Sejanus was like, oh, you're my friend, you're helping me, I trust you with this and that and that. And so it was also kind of sad, you know, to see that happen and be like, Sejanus is kind of one of our heroes of the story, and yet he is like trying to be besties with the villain. Yeah.
So my favorite character, I would have to say, is Dr. Gull.
Oh, that crazy bitch.
Yeah, she was absolutely insane. My first comment is, who lets this woman be around people, let alone actual children and like young minds? Because she's a teacher, like she's a professor. They're young minds.
Right.
Saying that I like her is kind of bad because she's not a good person in any way, shape, or form. She's a very bad person, but I think she added a lot to the story. She really got into Snow's head in a lot of situations, a lot of it being the reason why they do the Hunger Games and conforming and controlling the chaos, controlling the districts and stuff. And she had a very strong impact of who he turned out to be in the end.
Oh yeah.
I found her very intriguing, and she was a very bad person, and she did a lot of bad things, especially with her experimenting on animals to make new features for the games and stuff.
And letting them bite children and turn them into snake people.
Yeah. She was a very bad person, absolutely, but I think she brought a lot to the story.
For being a crazy bitch, she's a great character. And I think it's also really important that this book came out anytime past the year 2016. Because I think if it had come out earlier than 2016, for obvious reasons, we would have been a little bit more, oh, that's such a wild fictional character. There's nobody that could ever exist like that in the real world. But if 2016 and beyond has shown us anything, it's that crazy fucking people like this absolutely exist, and not only exist, but are in positions of power to get away with their crazy fuckery. Mm-hmm. So it's like, it's great that this book came out in 2020. We're all so disillusioned now to the point that we're like, yeah, this is real. Fucking crazy Dr. Gall.
And they're making a movie of this too, which we're going to have to do on your podcast, Flip the Script, on Spotify, Google, Apple Podcasts.
Anywhere you can listen to podcasts.
Yeah.
Yes, we are absolutely going to do a Songbirds episode, but also possible hypothetical fun fact, because I work in the film industry, there are whispers of I potentially could be getting an opportunity to work on that set. Who knows? Maybe yes, maybe no. Anybody listening, if that is the case, I may or may not be able to give little tidbits. Nothing that would break a non-disclosure agreement, but
not to break the law or anything. Well, if you see Josh Hutcherson on set, can you? He wouldn't be there, but if you see him,
my little tidbits would probably be like, "Oh my gosh, we had paninis for lunch the other day." Like that would be it. That would be all I would be allowed to talk about.
Oh god. Yeah. So the next thing I really want to talk about is the difference between the capital itself and all 12 of the districts. I really enjoyed the detail in explaining how the Hunger Games start. No one's really into the Hunger Games. Whether it be people in the capital or in any of the districts, 12 doesn't even watch the Hunger Games. They had one TV that they had to all share and no one had it on. And in the capital, it was kind of fading. The whole reason why the Hunger Games kind of develops into something further is because they worried that they would fall back into the chaos again after losing the Hunger Games. But I really enjoyed how it was kind of laid out and explained to us in more detail how the capital and the districts are all divided up and how everyone is suffering, whether it be on different degrees, and obviously people suffer more than other people, but the capital itself, it's divided up in not necessarily your race or your gender or your family, but like how much money you have.
No, totally. And I think on that note too, it's interesting to see the difference between where the capital is in this book and where the capital is in the trilogy, because in the trilogy it's far more everybody's rich. Even if you're only low level rich, you're still comfortable.
Yeah.
Even on the lowest end in the capital, you're still comfortable. You still probably have this nice apartment, food and water whenever you need, whatever, fancy clothes. Whereas in the districts, it's like the richest you can get is to be in the political hierarchy of your district, which is like being mayor, being whatever. And even then maybe you have a house.
Maybe.
But you're pretty low. The wealth gap is far greater in the trilogy than it is in this book. So that's why it's like really interesting to see how Snow himself plays into that, because I think it's kind of decently clear in this book. He starts off again on the lower end of the capital, which is close to a district wealth, give or take, but it's close enough there that like he sort of bleeds over a little bit into the district. And he talks so much about how Lucy can almost be capital because she's like so cool, whatever. There's almost a level of overlap between the districts and the capital in this book. And then by the time we get to the trilogy, there's not overlap, not even slightly. And it's interesting to see how Snow plays into that, because it's so clear that he's doing everything he can to climb to the top, and he's doing everything he can to sort of change these games in a way. By the time we get to the trilogy, it's clear that he has had a very heavy hand in widening this wealth gap. And I think part of it just goes back to his own personal fear and his own personal narcissism, with the fact that like everything that he believes about power structures and control, if you have like quote unquote main society of like the capital being all pretty happy and not much to complain about, that's going to be a little taste of paradise, and then everybody else can fucking suffer. And then there's no fear of that weird overlap. A Lucy Gray being able to hop into the capital, or a Sejanus Plinth being able to hang out in District 12. There's like no fear of that happening because everyone's so separated, which is fucked up.
Yeah, it definitely dives into it a little bit more, seeing it from somebody who's from the capital, because we couldn't really see it from Katniss's point of view. We get to see the outside view of it and her perspective of growing up in District 12 and seeing the capital on TV and all this kind of stuff, and her going into it for the first time and seeing how the world changes. You said this is him 60 years ago, where everything's a little bit different, and when he's president, things change. So he widens that gap.
Even in like Catching Fire, he has that line about explaining that the tributes this year are going to be reaped from existing victors. He has a line about to prove that even the strongest amongst you can't stand the might of the capital or something like that, which is even another tie into this like giant wealth gap and whatever, and this separation between districts and the capital, because it's again just another way for him to be like, I am so pissed off that you guys are even trying to rebel, and I'm so pissed off about my own problems that now I'm just going to say even literally the people who we've basically adopted into the capital, now we're saying like they will never be one of us because they're still like district scum or whatever. It's crazy.
Like, the more you like read between the lines in the Hunger Games, the more messed up it gets.
And that's why I love this series so much. In a lot of ways, it sort of aligns with my own understanding of our political structure and power structures. Yeah, this story plays so real, even though it is a fiction, and at times clearly fiction. It's still so real, and it's still so fucked up, like we're saying. Even whatever side of politics you're on, whatever, but you see kind of like the fucked upness of our government and our government structure. And so this series really putting it on view for everybody even more in such a palatable story. It's sort of like perfect for the time.
That's the hard part with it being a YA teenage. I don't know the exact term that this is kind of falling under. It feels like it's too much for them to swallow all at once. So that's why when it came out and was popular and they made movies and all this stuff about it, is because they focused more on the love triangle than they really did about all the political stuff that happens in it to sell it more. You have to really drown out that stuff to kind of focus in on that. That's why I like this book, because it doesn't focus on a romance or trying to win the games. It's focused on the political stuff, the behind the scenes stuff.
Yeah, for sure. I mean, I know we've talked about it being a young adult novel. Maybe this particular story, maybe something that is like could make it better would have been if it wouldn't have been labeled as a young adult story. It needed to be more of an adult fiction. It wouldn't have felt so heavy.
Yeah. I do have a question though. It does state a number of times that this takes place in the United States, in North America. And so my question is, like, where's the rest of the world? Why not write a book about that? Like, what's going on in Germany or, you know, Australia or Italy? Like, it's not mentioned in the book at all. It's like the earth is just all water except for North America.
They do mention it in this book in the end. They very vaguely allude to Canada existing and that they used to bop around to Canada.
Yeah, they don't necessarily say United States. They say North America, and Canada, you know, being part of North America.
Yes. No, here's the thing. I would have totally agreed with your question and been like, yeah, right? Where's the rest of the world? Here's the thing, man. A lot of shit's going down in America today. Where's the rest of the world?
Yeah.
I don't know. I mean, and I know that that's like a jump because obviously we don't have a literal Hunger Games happening.
Right.
So it's definitely a fair question to ask, like, where the fuck is the rest of the world? But I do think it sort of plays nicely into the fact that the US, we've established ourselves as world police. We're the top dogs, as much as we can possibly proclaim ourselves as. And so I think for that reason, it tracks, right? Like, it sort of tracks that whatever the fuckery we're going to get into, there's a solid chance that no other country is going to be like, well, let me go help them out. You know?
It's just weird to just not hear any mention of anything else. I guess in the Hunger Games, when I was reading it, they never really bring to attention where it takes place, while this one, like, blatantly says North America. But yeah, I just want to take a second here to shout out the Patreon subscribers. Thank you so much to Nick W., Bree P., and Lulu. I appreciate all the support me in making this silly little podcast. It's fun to make. Thank you so much. If you want to appear in a podcast shout out, head over to Patreon and subscribe today.
Hell yeah. Do it. Do it. Go do it. Why aren't you doing it? Get into that Patreon. And anybody who's listening, if you're not on Jen's Patreon for the book stop, you should 100% do it. It is genuinely worth it, and this podcast is amazing. It's always fun to listen to. You're gonna talk about books that you love. You're gonna talk about books that you didn't know that you're gonna love when you read them. And there's a lot of like fun stuff that she has.
So who would you say in this book is your favorite relationship? Just what connection did you really cement yourself to?
So this is like kind of not a favorite relationship in the sense that I enjoyed it, but in the sense that it was the most interesting to me. Dean Highbottom and Snow.
Okay. Yeah.
For anybody who hasn't read this, the long story short is that Dean Highbottom is introduced as this like kind of drugged out Dean who like kind of shits on Snow and is like, you're poor and I fucking know it, kid. And then we sort of find out later through the grapevine that Dean Highbottom was sort of best friends with Snow's dad. There was an assignment that Dean Highbottom and Snow's dad were given. Basically, Dean Highbottom jokingly invented the Hunger Games while he was drunk, talking to his good friend Snow's dad. And then Snow's dad genuinely took that, stole that drunken, awful idea, and sold it as his own, and therefore the Hunger Games were genuinely born. Find out later that Dean Highbottom gave Lucy some money at the end of it when she won and like apologized, right? And said like, hey, I'm sorry that you had to go through that. Is it ever going to make up for that? Fuck no. So that sort of relationship between Dean Highbottom and current Snow is interesting because of the way that he secondhand hates him.
Yeah, and then at the end, how everything kind of unfolds. It's very interesting.
It sort of reminds me of Professor Snape and Harry in a very different way.
I could see it.
But in that same kind of sense where Snape was not like directly involved with Harry until later. But Snape was more in the days of James and Lily. So he has a relationship with them, whatever that may be. And then it sort of drags on to his son.
Yeah. I'm going to be honest, when they said his name, I thought, oh, wow, finally a normal name. Dean. That was not his first name. His name was not Dean. My favorite, I would say, would probably have to be, again, I found it very hard to really connect with any of the characters through Snow's perspective because he's just so self-centered. He just cares about like clearing his family name. He doesn't care about connecting and making relationships with people. So I really enjoyed Lucy Gray and the Covey, her musical friends, and her family. So I really enjoyed that. The only thing I would say is I wish there was more, because we don't see it obviously until the end when we meet all of them and they, you know, give their thing, which is another thing I forgot to mention. There was just way too many songs, and I get it. It's called The Ballad of Songbirds. I get it.
The Ballad of Songbirds and Snakes, the musical.
The musical. It felt like a musical. I think it will translate better once it's on screen, but they just felt like poems to me, and I hate poems. I'm gonna say it. I don't vibe with poems. I just really like them. I just wish there was more, honestly. I wish there was more we could branch on to. The thing I didn't love was that Snow came to District 12. We got everything through Snow's perspective, so it was really hard to just connect to anybody. Seeing her relationship with those people, it was just jealousy. That's all he felt. And maybe he did start to feel a little spark of humanity and be like, wow, you know, she really cares for these people. I don't know.
No, I totally get that. I think that was probably one of the weakest parts of the story is when we're in District 12 at the end, because there are some interesting moments in there and there's a lot to learn from that section. But kind of like what you're saying, it does miss having somebody else's point of view to sort of latch onto and really dig your heels into all that.
Speaking of part 3, which is called Peacekeeper. Okay, I thought the end of the game where Lucy wins, I wasn't shocked in any way. I knew she was going to win. Obviously, she was going to win. I wasn't shocked in any way. I wasn't really rooting for her in the sense that I thought she was going to die on the next turn of page. But Snow cheating, it needed more significance. It needed more meat in the story because I didn't understand how it was so important until the very end. It felt so sudden where he was like, you know what? I cheated. It didn't feel like he was cheating.
Yeah, well, yeah.
I don't know. That's just my perspective, I guess. It just felt so sudden. And the next thing we knew, he was being shipped off to be a peacekeeper for X amount of years in District 12 that he chose so he could have the chance of finding Lucy Gray again.
I do think there were the pieces in place to sort of start to set up that he was cheating. I mean, we saw him give her what was the thingamajig?
Oh, the mirror?
Yes, thank you.
Compact mirror?
We saw him give her that, and that was kind of our hint. And then, of course, when Sejanus was in there, and that was kind of a little bit of also a cheat. But no, I agree. I think what it was is we needed something, just a little something before the game started of Snow cheating elsewhere. And maybe there was, and I just don't remember. I didn't cling to it enough. But I think if we would have had another little hint of something before the games, that would have sort of paid it off a bit more.
I just felt like it was a little out of character because he knew the risk of cheating. feel like he wouldn't have risked his family and his like family's name to go down in legacy as a cheater. So I don't know. I felt like a little out of character for me.
That I would actually disagree with, though. I would disagree with because I think Snow is kind of inherently a cheater, and we did see. Well, I don't know. It does kind of depend because obviously it's like his character in this book is the beginning of his character, not his fully fleshed out character in the trilogy. Obviously in the trilogy, he's definitely not above cheating.
Oh God, no.
Yeah, I guess you do make a point for sure on like it was a little out of character in where we thought he was in this book.
Pop over to part 3, which is the end of him going to District 12, becoming a peacekeeper. Was reading it, and I was just like, huh? Pardon?
Right, yeah.
It just felt too easy. And then the end, when he was like, oh, it was all a test. I was like, huh?
Yeah.
Huh times 2?
That part I kind of did get from the capital perspective, because I get that, of them being like fucked up enough to be like, let's just toss him into the districts with his little love affair Lucy Gray and see what happens. Definitely the ending of this book was a little not what could have been. I do think my favorite part of the ending though is when it turns out it's just him and Lucy in the wilderness supposedly running away, and then we have that scene where he's like looking everywhere going crazy trying to shoot her and does or doesn't shoot her, up to your interpretation.
It was left pretty open-ended, yeah.
And I did love that.
I did like that, yeah.
That's sort of the moment that like she breaks away from capital control, because if Snow doesn't know what's going on with her, nobody knows what's going on with her. We never figure out a full ending for her. She's fully like quote unquote freed from capital control.
Yeah, so do you want to play a little game?
Yeah, let's play a little game.
All right, so again, we've talked about the districts and the capital, but one thing we didn't really mention is that the districts is kind of divided up all over the quote-unquote United States, North America area, and each one provides a certain thing to the capital. It's kind of their payment for being alive, and each one gives a specific thing. So I'm going to ask for a district, and you are going to tell me what they provide.
Ooh, okay. I'm going to get probably 4 of these right.
So District 12, what do they provide?
Coal.
Yes, coal mining.
That's the one. That's like the free space of a bingo card. Like,
it is. District 11.
So I remember distinctly District 11 had a lot of forests, but I don't think that they were providing lumber. I think that they were providing something else. Something at the top of the trees?
Tops of trees?
Yeah. Oh no.
That grow
berries?
Oh,
Were they like
close.
Like fruits of some sort?
If you're a farmer.
If I'm a farmer and I'm farming berries.
No.
Or fruits.
And vegetables.
Fruits and vegetables. Is that it?
Crop is the official term that I was looking for.
Crop. Okay, but that counts.
Sure.
I'm gonna count it.
District 10.
Fuck if I know. I got no idea.
Produces from something else.
From the underground potatoes.
No. No. Livestock.
Oh, right. Yeah, that's not potatoes.
Could you imagine having one district for crops and one specifically for spuds?
Just for potatoes. But it would track. We had a lot of potatoes.
All right. District 9. It's another crop, but a mass production of this.
I don't know why my brain is thinking this. Tobacco? Drug district?
It's not tobacco and it's not potatoes.
Grains?
Yeah.
Grains? Like wheat.
Grains,
wheat.
yep.
Yes.
District 8.
Okay, District 8. Textiles? Are they the textiles?
Yeah.
Oh, dude.
All right, District 7.
Lumber.
Yep.
It's like I know that one because of Joanna.
District 6.
Transportation? They make like trains and stuff?
Yep, they make transportation.
Nice.
Manufacturing. District 5.
They're metal. Are they metal? Are they metals?
Mm-mm.
Clothes? Well, I guess we kind of already did that with textiles. Medical equipment?
Mm-mm. Look me in the eye.
I'm looking you in the glasses?
No. Power.
Power.
Like your laptop runs on electricity.
Oh, okay. Got you. Okay.
District 4.
District 4. They're fish, right?
Yep, fishing.
Okay, yes.
District 3. This one might be a little hard.
The first 3 districts are the hardest because I know that all 3 of them provide some form of like technology / weaponry-ish. District 3, I'm going to guess, are they the ones that do like microchips and stuff?
Yep, electronical goods.
Yes, killing it.
All right, District 2.
I'm going to guess that they're weapons.
Mm-mm.
No, they're another form of technology, aren't they? Are they? Oh, wait, no. There's one of them that, like, mines for other stuff. District 2. Gems and gemstones and... Yes! Fuck yeah.
All right, District 1.
Fuck if I know. Do they do weapons? They do weapons, right?
It just says luxury goods. I would say, like, just high quality stuff. So maybe weapons? I'm not totally sure. But I know they're, like, that district's kind of, like, known for their powerful people and powerful warriors and stuff, so.
I think they also do some weapons, because I think I remember, obviously they don't really get weapons from District 13 anymore, because that used to be their hub. But I think that kind of transferred over to District 1, if I'm not mistaken. Yeah, you're right. It's obviously more luxury items, at least.
Yeah, got, like, half of them, I think.
That's not bad. Better than I thought I was going to do.
Yeah, so what would you say, in your own opinion, your own words, if you were writing this book and it was your story, how would you tell it?
Oh, great question. So I know we already talked a little bit about how adding multiple perspectives would have helped this book. I think that's definitely one thing I would have tried to just have in this book. You know, I think I would have also just had more of Snow's life in this. I think I would have had flash forward, he's a young adult, you know, in his mid to late 20s or something, and maybe a little bit more where he is now, how he's starting to really, really thrive or whatever the fuck it is. That's also another missed opportunity. Also something that I would have wanted to add to this book is more of Snow in his later days. Another Hunger Games would have been nice. Maybe if we would have seen the one before this play out really quickly in the beginning of it. This Hunger Games is already over and the class kind of just did whatever and it wasn't that cool. Or, you know, just something like, we don't have to get super into it, but maybe if we would have gotten like another earlier Hunger Games.
A prequel to the prequel?
Yeah. Just something before it. Or even the one immediately after to kind of like get the start of it. We don't even need to see the full thing, but just sort of how it's already progressing or something.
I found that it was interesting that Reaping Day was on July 4th.
Ooh, you know what? I never fucking caught that.
Yeah, that was very interesting.
What does it mean?
Anyways, yeah, my missed opportunities are kind of following literally the same line. Either I want more points of view. Obviously, this book would be either double the size or lose a lot of information, but I think there's some information that we could lose, and we could put in Lucy Gray, or we could put in shifting points of view where we have Snow as the main point of view, and then we see a chapter of Dr. Gull, we see a chapter of Dean Highbottom, we see a chapter of, you know, somebody else. So it kind of shifts and we can see other perspectives. I also think that we should have skipped ahead. I said that we should see him as a president, and he sees Katniss for the first time, and he goes, oh wow, she's gonna be an issue.
Yeah, ooh, oh my god, can you imagine if we would have just got a page of that even? That would have been cool. That would have been a great, like, lead-in.
I think it would have been interesting, and it would have tied it together really well to kind of bring us back, oh yeah, there's this whole other arc of him now that we have to kind of revisit and go back into. So, again, I just don't think President Snow was a good choice of main character. I'm just gonna say it. I don't think I would have chose him as my main character for this prequel. I see why she did it, understand why she did it, but I don't think it was the strongest choice. I would have tried maybe somebody else. I know a lot of people say that. A lot of people said they wanted like a Finnick story or a Haymitch. As much as I would love to read their perspective, I don't think they would have gave much.
You know what? I gotta chime in here for a second and say nobody's talking about a Cinna origin story, but we fucking need it. I would love a Cinna origin story. Would be so compelling. I would love that.
I would love
Mags,
yeah. I would even love her. Oh my god.
Absolutely. Oh, that would have been great.
We've been talking for a while. It's gonna be a long episode. I like that we kind of come from different perspectives, but we're able to kind of meet in the middle and be like, you know what? Yeah.
This was definitely not as much of like a brawl as I thought it was gonna be. But I'm glad.
You just see us fighting in the district. I've enjoyed talking about this, but we're gonna do one thing before we go. We're gonna do a little rating scale. Right. But we do it different here on the Book Stop. We kind of make up our own thing. So I would give the Ballad of Songbirds and Snakes by Suzanne Collins 3 songbirds eating snakes out of 8.
Oh, I like that. Okay, that was a really
Thank
good
you.
tie-in. Also, 3 out of it. I know you didn't like this one that much.
Okay, the 3, it got a 3 because I like some things in it. I just, like, I'm bored. I'm just not into that, I guess. It's just not my style of book that I really get into. Not saying that it was not worth reading. I'm glad that I read it and now understand a lot more. And I really want to go watch The Hunger Games right now.
Me too. Right, yeah.
But I gave it a little bit of low of a reading because I just personally didn't love the story. I'm very excited for the movie though. I'm interested to see how the directors kind of take it and shape it where it's going to translate on screen.
Yeah, because there's really a lot of ways that this could go.
Yeah, and it could go bad.
Yeah, I hope not, but we'll see. We'll see when it comes out.
Yeah.
So I would give my rating as a 10 out of 12 districts, which I know is kind of a little bit of a lame rating scale, but I really did like the 12. It's a good number.
All right.
So I would give it a 10 out of 12 districts. I think there are definitely things that could be improved upon to really enhance the story, but I overall liked it for really the larger messaging. So I think maybe overall it really loses us in the details of it.
Mm-hmm.
But the overall story, the overall messaging, the overall themes are very important and really cool to be talking about.
Absolutely, yeah.
So yeah, 10 out of 12 districts.
All right. We've been planning this one since the beginning of the year, I think, to get into this book and to finally talk about it has been exciting. So thank you for taking the time and not only reading this, but talking with me about this. And I'm really excited. We don't have anything scheduled right now, but maybe before the end of the year, New Year. Oh, yeah, you're going to be on February 1st. Because it is tradition that you are my first guest of the year.
Oh yes, that's right. Okay, so we're gonna have to find something.
We're gonna read The Stone Sky by N.K. Jemisin.
Yes, finally finish off the trilogy. That's perfect timing because I think that series, the Broken Earth series, is finally being brought to the big screen soon.
Yes. Oh, I'm so excited.
Yeah.
It's an amazing book. I know we're kind of going off the rails right now, but such an amazing book.
Right.
But
nonetheless, really good. Thank you for having me. As always, I love being on the book stop. And again, if you guys are listening, if this is your first episode listening, welcome to the club. You've got a lot to catch up on and a lot more coming your way. And also check out that Patreon, man. There's a lot of cool stuff that comes with that. And you get to support Jen and her amazing podcast adventures.
Stop. Also, don't forget to check out Kim's podcast, Flip the Script. We've done a few. I think my favorite, it's hard to choose between Stuart Little or Chicken Little, honestly.
God, right?
The Littles.
What a duo.
We also talked about my absolute favorite thing in the whole wide world, Avatar, so make sure you check that out. That was my very first podcast ever.
Really?
That was the very first one we ever did. I've ever been on a podcast, so hear me sound extremely nervous and completely reading off script. Go check it out.
You were great. That was a great episode. Yeah.
I might have to go re-listen to that because I don't think it was.
We'll have a listening party.
Okay, sounds good. Well, thank you again, and we'll see you around.
All right, see ya. Bye.
Thank you for turning the pages with us today. If you've enjoyed this episode, show your support by leaving a review, sharing the episode, and following the podcast on Instagram at The Book Stop Podcast. Join us on Patreon for early access to episodes and other additional content. Thank you for listening, and I'm looking forward to the next one. Hope you are too.